So this morning, we're going to hear our marvelous speakers here talk about the climate crisis, which we all know is impacting children and young people disproportionately around the world. And young people are at the forefront of climate activism. Yet, only 2.4% of all climate-related funding goes to efforts by children and young people. Isn't that shocking? So this session is hosted by the Fund for Global Human Rights and Alana Foundation, and it will explore the dynamic intersection between children and youth rights and climate activism, offering a platform for the exchange of insights and experience of the collective work on climate. So, to start with, we'll hear from Alana's Foundation's work in building a coalition around children's activism and helping to bring children's voices to global stages like COP. And from the Fund for Global Human Rights, they will share with us the findings of a recent scoping report, a scoping study they did in about 6 countries, asking young people about their experiences of work on climate crisis and the funding they have access to. So I will now introduce to you our speakers for today. We have Rene Lova. Oh, please give Rene a big hand. Rene is a UNICEF climate advocate from Madagascar. Next, we have Lais Flory, who is the head of partnerships and nature at the Alana Foundation. Please give. Next to her, we have Dora Mwanuzi, who is a children's rights consultant at the Fund for Global Human Rights. And last but not the least, we've got Amy Ongeso, who is the network manager at Grassroots Justice Network the Grassroots Network. So you're welcome, and I think we'll pass the mic over to Lais to kick us off.
Well, I think I'm going to stand up because I think it's going to be easier just to follow the presentation. So good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. Such an honor to be part of this amazing conference. So thanks for putting it together. Yesterday, I had the pleasure to meet a lot of people from Africa and also from different foundations. So it's been super rich to exchange and to learn from you. So I think what I'm going to share with you is just the strategy that Alana Foundation is doing in the international advocacy scenery. So as John said, my name is Lais Fleury. I'm from Brazil, but in the last 3 years, I've been living in the US. And I work for Alana Foundation. And Alana Foundation is part of a group of 3 organizations that are based in Brazil. It's a social and environment group of impact group of organizations that works globally. And our main goal is to honor the child. And also we have initiatives that also we understand that makes the world better for them to live in. So our commitment is really like the whole development of the child and also to guarantee their rights. And we have 3 organizations that are part of this group. We understand that all the causes that we face today, we need an integrated approach because they are super complex. So we understand that we need different strategies and different narratives as well, because we have different stakeholders that we want to reach out to have more like a systemic way of working. So Alana Institute, it's the non-profit organization of the group. And the mission of Alana Institute is to honor the child. And we have different initiatives in different fields that pretty much works to guarantee children's rights and their health development. And then we also have Alana Lab, that this one is a profit organization, but it's a B Corp, a B corporation. So all the profits that we are able to have, we reinvest in the organization. And the way that we do it, we work with entertainment. We understand that films are a very powerful way of touching like people's hearts and minds. And we work with films as a tool of advocacy as well. So all the films that we produce, there is a cause behind, and we want to make like a positive impact campaign to help us with the advocacy that we understand that it's very important to do. And then the Alana Foundation is the philanthropic arm of that. So we make partnerships, we give some grants, and what we understand is that the 3 organizations working together just make us more powerful, and we also have like a better and stronger impact. So we have a very different and distinctive way of working. So on the climate change scenery, we, like in 2021, the UN released this report, like it's actually, there is a very beautiful name. The name is like Making Peace with Nature, that recognize that we're facing a triple crisis. I don't think that we have only these 3 crises, but it's what we understand that it's based on, that it's the climate change, the loss of biodiversity, and then also the pollution. But we understand that there is another crisis that it's very important, and nobody talks very much about it, but the traditional communities, they've been awareing us about that for a long time, that it's the disconnection with nature. We understand that this is the root of everything that is happening right now. The way that we live in the urban setting, unfortunately, disconnect us to nature a lot. And this author that we like very much, his name is Richard Louv. In 2005, he wrote this book, The Last Child in the Woods, that I really recommend it to read. And in this book, he coined this term. It's the nature deficit disorder, that especially the kids who lives in the urban settings, if we don't make effort, if we don't intentionally expose them to nature, they might they might grow up without having contact with nature, and this impact in a very bad way their health. And also on the other side, we have researchers that says that kids who grow up in contact with nature, they have a healthier development and in a healthy way of being. And it's interesting because I have here 2 pictures from the global, one from the global south and another one from the global north. Of course, we are a very like different and diverse world, fortunately, but the way that we urbanize our cities, they're pretty much the same, like we give a lot of spaces for buildings, and we don't prioritize nature very much. So when we grow up in cities like that, we don't have access to nature, and we end up like disconnecting from nature. But on the other side, as I said before, there are lots and tons of evidence that really tell us that the contact with nature is very important for the integral development of kids, and in all perspectives, like social, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and also physical. So it's crucial that we make sure and also nurture their love for nature, because we only take care of what we love and what we know. So this is something, and this is one of the missions of Alana as well. Unfortunately, climate change is a reality. It's last year. I don't know if probably you heard about that. This is a community in the middle of the Amazon, in the state of the Amazonas. And yesterday we got hit for a very serious drought. And this was like October of last year. And then, Sheila, please, the next one. And now in Brazil, right now, there is a state on the south of the country. It's facing a huge flooding right now. Yesterday, for example, I was on the phone until like almost 2 o'clock in the morning because we're trying to do our best to help the state because we have more than 1.5 million people that it's displaced from their homes, and we've never seen anything like that before, and it's only by the volume of water. Like it's just constantly raining, doesn't stop raining, and unfortunately impact the whole state. So we're not talking about one city, for example. It's just like the whole state. And it's very clear to see, especially when we have a real event right now, that how kids are disproportionately affected by it. So we have, for example, 24% of the school of the kids were severely damaged and impacted, and they have no idea when they're gonna be able to return to school. And also we have right now 84 schools that are pretty much serving as a shelter for the families that are displaced, and lots of traumas, lots of emotional traumas happening right now. So we can clearly see that a climate crisis affect their daily routine and also their development and also their mental health. So kids are definitely the most disproportionate affected. We understand that the climate crisis is a child right crisis. Over 1 billion, we're talking about 75 kids in the world lives in the global south, and they are suffering all the impacts that they have not created. And unfortunately, there is also this inequality in the world that the global north that unfortunately cause it not major cause all the impacts that we've seen right now, but the global south is the one that it's heavily impacted. And why kids are the most vulnerable? Because they're still growing, so they're in a very special phase of development, and both their physical and mental development will be greatly affected, and depending on the phase that they are hit, it's gonna cause like problems for their entire life. So that's why we should be very aware. And we have only 2.4% of funds of climate finance from key multilateral funds that it's child responsive. So we don't have funds enough, we don't have a lot of investment on that, and this is one of the goals that we have as a foundation, just to try to bring this awareness and also bring this perspective of the global south being highly impacted, because we know that children who are economically marginalized and discriminated, including girls, indigenous children, children with disabilities, refugees, migrants, and displaced children disproportionately bear the brunt of the impacts of climate crisis. And I think my dear colleague, Luva, she's going to be able to share with you what she's facing in Madagascar. Right, Luv? But now we understand, like in September 2023, last year, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Children, they released this General Comments 26 that they give very clearly guidance to countries, to the parties, and obligate individually and collective efforts at how we can protect children's rights, and also emphasizing that all the kids and all the children, they have the right to access a healthy environment. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to share how Alana Foundation is trying to do an international advocacy to incorporate children's rights into climate action. And we understand that this needs to be an integrated approach because it's a very complex issue, and we need different strategies and different narratives to tackle this problem. So the first one is just to work collectively. So 2 or 3 years ago, we helped to facilitate a coalition that put together different organizations that work with children and advocacy, like UNICEF, Save the Children, Plan International, Mototo News, actually, that it's here, it's also in this coalition as well. And we've been working together to strategize how we can put children's priority in the negotiations. So we have a team that it's pretty much like right now, it's happening, the conference in Bonn, in Germany, that we are there. I was there like 3 years ago. That's why I didn't arrive here 3 years ago, 3 days ago. That's why I didn't arrive for the first day of the panel, because we are there like talking to parties, negotiating to make sure that they prioritize children in the negotiations. And it was historic. For the first time, we had an expert dialogue that it was released by the UNFCCC, that it's pretty much the official obligation that we needed to feed all the parties with evidence why children are very impacted, disproportionately impacted, and also give them language and key solutions, like suggestions of how they can incorporate children's rights in the negotiations. So it was an historic moment. That's why I didn't want to miss. And unfortunately, I arrived here like a little bit later. And with these joint efforts, we produce like very technical documents around like the data and also solution-specific asks in what parties can do about it. And we were able to have Francisco Veras, that is this child from, he's 14 years old, he's from Colombia, and he participated for, it was the first time ever that a child participated in a negotiations room. Like this was one of the assembly with the parties, just like negotiating children's rights. Another approach that we understand that it's very important, it's how to share important stories, like that really is going to teach people's minds and people's hearts. And this is one of the reasons that my friend Lova is here, because she's part of this film. So we made a partnership with UNICEF, and we also have other foundations investing in this film with us, and we wanted to make sure that children's voice were heard in COPE. Not a lot of, COPE is not a child-friendly venue at all. It's very hard, it's the language, it's very complex, and it's not child-friendly at all. So we want to make sure that all the kids were there with their concerns, with their suggestions as well. So we made this film. Actually, there are like 7 films, one long one that you're going to have the opportunity to see here after my conversation here with you, but also we had 6 different ones, very short ones, like 1 minute, that we made specifically with themes that the parties were gonna negotiate in that COPE, the COPE 28. So we did something very specifically for the negotiators and for decision makers. And what we did in COPE, we were able to exhibit the film in very like high level meetings and also like ministerial plenaries. So this one, for example, was one that they were only talking about children's rights into climate change. As you see, it's a very formal environment with high-level authorities. This is the Ministry of Education hub and like pavilion that they had in COPE. And this was like the center of the COPE in Dubai last year. They had like a huge dome that everybody who were there could see, because it's very like big and huge. And we were able to exhibit the film there. So everybody who were there was aware that the children's, and they could hear the children's voice, their concerns, and also their suggestions. So this is like a strategy that we had that really we understand that touches people's heart, but also on the other side, also make sure that children are there and people are aware how disproportionately impacted they are. And then another way of working is just as you, like COP 30 is going to be in Brazil next year. And we've been working in the field a lot. So this is again, for example, Alana Foundation does a lot of the work in the international field, but the Alana Institute, that it's based in Brazil, based in São Paulo, it's constantly working with the Brazilian government. That one is President Lula. Anyway, authorities from the federal government in Brazil advocating for the first COP for children. So we want to understand, we really want them to mainstream children's rights, to make sure that they bring evidence and also like light for children in this COP, making the COP 30 more child friendly with easier language. And we had Lova was there with us in COP 28, and we did a lot of like, we brought a lot of attention on that. And at the end, we were quite happy. We saw the Ministry of Environment from Brazil, Marina Silva, already talking about the importance of have a COP for children. And when we mean COP for children, it's not to have a COP that it's going to be for the children, but to have children's rights mainstream in all the negotiators and making sure that the children have the opportunity to be there and advocate for their own rights, like Lova did last year in COP 28. This is some of our outcomes. It's very technical, so I think I have already shared with you, but that we had the expert dialogue, that it was a huge landmark. But it's important to also mention, like in COP27, it was the first time that we had children mentioned in the cover decision. The cover decision is like the decisions that all the parties agreed on, and this decision, it's like the guidelines for all the countries, what they need to follow, for example, that it was decided in COP. It was the first time ever that we had children mentioned, like 7 times, do this very close and in the field approach, negotiating with the parties and sensitizing them to really add children's rights in their negotiations. So now, the last thing that I would like to share is that I think the COP 30 is going to be an amazing opportunity for the philanthropic field as well, especially for the Global South. We see a lot of foundations, very well intentioned, of course, like from the Global North, funding organizations from the Global North, and then sometimes they fund organizations from the Global South, but they don't have the context. They are not immersed in this reality. So I think we, as foundations of the Global South, has an amazing opportunity to really like lead the way, to make partnerships with foundations from the Global North, just to bring more funds and more money to the children. That it's like 75% of the children live in the Global South, and they are the most impacted. So I think we have this amazing opportunity right now just to gather efforts and really like lead the way, especially having COP in the Amazon, in Belém, COP 30. So now I would like to share the video, the important stuff that we shared in COP, as I mentioned before, in partnership with UNICEF, that Lova is there. And then after that, I would like to invite Lova to share her experience on participating in the film and also as a youth activist, and also how was her experience in COP28 as well. So thank you.
Good morning. Thanks for giving me the floor to be here to introduce myself to you again. I'm Luva Rene. I'm 13 years old from Madagascar, and I'm youth advocate as UNICEF Madagascar. In this video, produced by Alana Foundation and UNICEF, I was explaining how climate change affected my country, and it was very important to me to talk about it, to share about it, because in Madagascar, many children was suffer about climate change. It is a very big problem for many families, many children, and we need to change this because, for example, last year we had a cyclone in the east coast of Madagascar, and many houses were destroyed, many schools were closed, and we can't go to school. It's that's a side for us because our first desire is have the better for our future generation, and how we can have this if we don't have the opportunity to go to school, to have a good health or have a life in good condition. That's the reason why I participate in the COP28, and there I was so excited because I was learning many good things. I was uh, learning many experience. I was see many people, and when I come back to my country, it was very important to me because I was able to bring and share some of my journey and a good result. For example, UNICEF gave s- some school kids after the cyclone of my school, and many children want to talk with me, ask me many things, and I hope that after this conference too, uh, we will have a fantastic result for children and youth. Thanks for your attention.
Now we'll turn it over to Dora and Amy to share with us the findings of their scoping study, which looked at both the impact but the response of young people in 6 African countries.
All right. Thank you so much, John. I hope you can hear me. I'll just stand right here. Okay. I hope I'll be able to see. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dora Mhanuzi. I am from Kampala, Uganda. I work with the Fund for Global Human Rights, and I'm very excited to speak to you this morning and to present the research findings from a scoping study that we did with young people in 6 countries. So, how did we get here? So, since last year at the fund, we've been having conversations on how we can better support initiatives by young people in the climate justice space. So, we're asking ourselves, you know, what are the priorities of young people at the moment? What are their funding needs? What are the gaps and opportunities that we can seize to lessen the burdens that they face as they implement their activities? It's okay, no. So let me also open mine here, so maybe it'll be easier. Okay, a second, please. Yes. So I was saying, we're having these internal conversations on how we can support young people in the climate justice space. So we were also focusing particularly on understanding, first of all, what are the impacts of climate change on young people in their communities? How are young people organizing to combat some of these impacts? And also, what are the funding needs of young activists in these spaces? So because we were really passionate about meeting young people where they are, we wanted the young people to design this process to dictate the terms of the projects. We decided to reach out to them in their communities, in their countries, to speak to them so that they could so that their voices could inform the design of the project. So then we were also looking to be as inclusive as we could. So we piloted in 6 countries, 3 Anglophone countries, Uganda, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, 2 Francophone countries, Senegal and Benin, and 1 Lusophone country, Guinea-Bissau. We spoke to about 300 young activists representing over 200 national and community-based organizations. So the objectives I've already hinted on them, but one, we're looking to understand, the impacts of climate change, but also the youth-led climate ecosystem in these countries. We're also particularly looking to assess the strategies that young people use. as they tackle or as they implement their initiatives around climate change, and we were in particular focused on what legal empowerment strategies were being used by young people. And my senior colleague is going to hint more on why we were specific on legal empowerment. We're also looking to evaluate the funding landscape and identify the gaps. We were also looking to leverage networks for impactful funding, and in this, we spoke to partners from other funding organizations in the countries we're piloting in. So in Uganda, we're in a conversation with the American Jewish World Service. In Liberia, we're speaking to Action Aid, because these are organizations that were already funding in these spaces. We're also looking to identify barriers and enablers for youth participation in climate action. Okay, so how are young people organizing themselves? So we realized that that youth-led climate action space is, first of all, multifaceted and is characterized by the following trends. One, we noticed that young people were moving beyond protesting. So while protests and strikes remained, a tactic for young people, they're also increasingly pursuing solution-oriented approaches. So, in recognizing the urgency of the climate crisis, they were launching community projects or initiatives that address the immediate needs of, or that address the immediate impacts of climate change. We also noticed a trend towards amplifying voices through digital advocacy. In this, that young activists were leveraging social media to amplify their messages, to connect to world leaders, but also to belong to, to connect to global movements outside their communities. We also noted that there's a trend towards moving from the streets to the table. So young activists were no longer just comfortable demanding for action, but were actively seeking opportunities within our decision-making spaces, but also influencing policies. We also noticed that our young activists were also recognizing the bigger picture and realizing that climate change impacts are intersectional. So they were increasingly seeking collaboration with other movements, like gender inequality, economic justice, and indigenous rights. Okay, so what are the major achievements that we noticed? So we were asking young people, what have you managed to achieve so far in the work that you do? And we noticed that one of the key achievements has been raising awareness. The continued actions of young activists have successfully raised awareness about the urgency of the climate crisis. They've also made climate change a key topic of discussion in their communities, at national and international levels. There's also been a shift in the narrative, such that instead of, like I already said, instead of just demanding action or raising awareness, young people are also increasingly shifting the narrative to solution-oriented approaches. I already spoke about policy engagement and changing the discourse around how governments are organizing around climate change. Then they've also managed to build alliances in most of the countries we piloted in with the activists that we spoke to. We realized that they were not just, they were conducting their own initiatives in their countries that were locally built, but then they're also replicating global action in their communities. And then we also noticed that young activists were inspiring global action everywhere. So prominent activists like Vanessa Nakate from Uganda have become influential figures in the global climate space and are inspiring young people everywhere to, stand up against climate change. Next slide. So we are also interested in knowing what motivates young people to engage in climate action, because we knew that this would also help us understand the breadth and width of their engagement. So we, the young people that we spoke to, informed us that they are motivated by passion for the planet, concern for future and current generations, but also they pursue climate action because it provides opportunities for personal financial growth through climate activism. In this, we were also, looking to debunk some myths that have been fronted by, several figures within governments when they say young people are pursuing climate action because, they're being funded by foreign forces to stabilize communities, to halt development projects in their communities. So we found that that is entirely untrue, and that many of these young people that are in these spaces are there because maybe they have experienced firsthand the impact of climate change in their communities, the erratic weather patterns, and they decide they need to do something about it. So what are the barriers to their engagements? One is a lack of public awareness. And in this, we realize that in most of the communities, there's little dissemination of environment and climate change information. And this means that citizens are not exactly aware of their environmental rights. What this means is that, it makes climate advocacy a bit hard because many of the community members would think, some of these issues are a work of fiction. So then, and we know that for advocacy to work, there's got to be community support. So without that support, young activists are left with a much harder task than they would really have. They also have limited funding to youth groups. We've already hinted about this. There's young activists in these spaces are also competing for the little funds that are reserved for youth-led initiatives, and this sort of hinders the implementation of their initiatives. We also have a repression from governments. So many of the respondents that we spoke to let us know that they have experienced a lot of impunity from governments or persons who purport to work for governments. There's been a continued threat to their lives, to their safety, and to their work. So they work in a very difficult conditions where they also face a constant threat of persecution, of arrest, and imprisonment. Then we also have community resistance, and this is similar to lack of awareness. But this means that young activists face resistance from their own communities. Many of their communities dismiss their efforts as either fraudulent or just illegitimate. And so this lack of support obviously undermines the credibility and effectiveness of youth-led climate activism. Then we have complicated language of climate justice. Lais has already hinted about this. Many of the young people that we spoke to, especially those from rural areas or those with limited educational backgrounds, notice that the discourse around climate change is very complicated. I am sure we all know that this is in fact true. So it means that even while these, there are activists in communities that are doing good work, they feel excluded from the global movement because they are unable to participate in it. So they're asking that we will need to sort of simplify some of these concepts or, do capacity building for young people that might need it in order for them to bring them closer to their fellows. Then there's also limited information on opportunities. And maybe this is something that we as funding organizations can think about. But they say that the trend lately is for funding organizations to directly scoop. That they no longer do open calls. So for newer groups or groups that are based in rural communities and are mostly unknown, will never have a chance to apply for opportunities like that. There's also, of course, an absence of collective database of these opportunities. So so young people in urban centers who can access faster internet may be able to find these opportunities, but for those in rural and underserved communities, it's a different story. Then there's also a marginalization of African youth voices on the global stage. So the respondents we spoke to told us that they often face a marginalization within the global climate discourse, where their voices and perspectives are sidelined in favor of those from Western countries. And what this does is that it eliminates, undermines the representation of young activists from the global South. Then we also, the respondents also told us that majority of, yes, that the funding ecosystem highly favors organizations from the Anglophone and not those from the Francophone and Russophone. And I also do know that this is because maybe most of the funding organizations are, from Anglophone countries. So what this means is that sometimes organizations from these other countries are forced to either rebrand or adopt English names so that they are able to fit within the criteria that is set by funding organizations. Next slide, please. Yes, and then the graphic and demographic characteristics. We were also, curious to know the demographics of this space, and our consultations indicated that there's concentration in urban centers. Maybe, and in some instances, you'll find it's a national organization that is based in the capital, but implements across the country, or has branches across the country. Or in some cases, we find it's just based in the city and just implements again in rural communities. Yeah, but and this can be explained by access to funding, access to services, also level of education. But there's an apparent concentration of this work in urban centers. Then the leadership composition, we were aware before we went to the field that there are a lot of young people that were leading the work in communities. And so we were happy to find that over 60% of the young people of the organizations that we spoke with were actually led by young people, or that there were young people in decision-making positions. Then we were also a bit worried by an absence of young women in this space. So while there is a strong youth presence, we noticed that in most rooms that we spoke in, there were little or simply no young women present. So this for us meant that moving forward, we would need to deliberately seek out organizations that are led by young women for them to be represented. I'll now hand it over to my senior colleague to take us through the next slides.
Good morning. My name is Amy Ongeso. I don't work for the Fund for Global Human Rights. I work for the Grassroots Justice Network, or NAMATI. And I worked with the Fund for Global Human Rights in this scoping, and I was able to go to Benin and to Senegal to see some of the work that young activists are doing. So predominantly self-funding, and they get small grants. There was an organization in the north of Senegal where the Green Wall is starting. I mean, the Green Wall is running through Senegal, coming down this side, and it's called Doulemva. And 90% of the work they do is funded by the Senegalese in the diaspora or the community themselves. It's quite impressive work, but they'd obviously need some injection, some money to help them do this work in the long term. They get typically very, very small grants. And as my colleague has said, because they're Francophone, it's difficult for them to tap into the Anglophone basket of funding to support their work. Competitive and scarce opportunities, that's obvious. And then they get, one-off project support grants limiting the long-term sustainability. So a couple of groups we spoke to didn't have projects that reached somewhere, but they still need more money for the projects to continue. On the next slide. Because they're young, there is a lack of trust from donors. They're not so sure about their capacity to do this and the experience to lead such initiatives. So there's a lot of skepticism, bureaucratic hurdles in trying to access this funding, capacity constraints. One respondent we spoke to, she's based in Dakar, she said, well, listen, I just don't have the time to keep my eye to see how many funding opportunities are coming because I'm in the field at the same time. So we're overworked, we're thin, we're thinly stretched, and so there's no one to keep tabs on the amount of money or the funding opportunities that are there. Reliance on young volunteers, which is not a very sustainable model because the young volunteers will leave and go look for better opportunity. Yes, limited awareness has been spoken about. Legal obstacles for child-led organizations. They need legal support and trust building. And also the shifting donor preferences. There's a reduced open for calls and focus on direct engagement with established groups, and a majority of these youth groups were not quote unquote established in how is defined in the donor ecosystem. Yes, I've said the donors have a preference for charitable status and flexibility in funding. They said they just need this funding to get to them. They know how to do the work and allow them to navigate in the communities with funding that can be flexible to the challenges that keep arising as they work. They need reduced application requirements, equitable grant amounts. Just because we're young, don't give us less. We're capable and we're able. That's the message. Minimal post-funding interference. The lanes. So the donors, you give us the money, and then the young people, we will implement because we know what we're doing, but don't try and always try to step in and try and control what it is that we're doing. Capacity building, training, that has been mentioned by Dora, and opportunities for international engagement and networks. We know a lot of magic happens in rooms like this where we meet, engage, speak, and interact. And so the youth are also requesting for more opportunities such as this. So how young people want to be supported, I feel, is almost like a repeat, but quickly, equitable funding mechanisms, a flexible application process, inclusive projects, and participatory decision-making, which are top headlines, but quite obvious in terms of what it is that they need to support them to do their work better. Next slide. Cross-border collaboration, this is quite important. I'll just go off on a tangent a bit. So I have just concluded an online training for almost young people on the question, on the theme of building community power to fight injustice. And we had cross-border collaboration. It was online. The course was on WhatsApp and it was on Zoom. And we had breakout discussions. And the breakout discussions were so rich when you put youth from Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, Tanzania together, or when you put youth together from Senegal, Benin, Togo, Mali, to just really talk about what it is that they are doing and how they're building community power in the communities to fight injustice. It was not expensive. We didn't even have to fly. We just put them together virtually. And even in the WhatsApp groups, that's a whole different story. But the discussions were quite rich, and the feedback was, it was really nice to meet other Africans going through the same thing. So they really appreciate that kind of collaboration. Knowledge sharing and solidarity goes hand in hand with that, and capacity building with a rights-based approach. And so this takes me to my next slide, which is legal empowerment. So legal empowerment really is my background. It's our bread and butter as Namati and the Grassroots Justice Network, because we feel that legal empowerment is offering a strategy for climate justice that works, at least from our work and from part of the members of the Grassroots Justice Network. So one of my, the eye with which I was interacting with youth groups, they do wonderful work. They're doing activism. It's brilliant. The energy around it is good. But I think what we can do is combine the power of the law and the power of activism. So the activism is a fuel. It keeps attention on the issue, but the law is the roots. We need something to ground us in our activism. And that's one thing I noted. So even if we, going back to legal empowerment, is using law as an organizing tool, was something that wasn't really coming out in the initiatives for the youth as they were organizing to, address the issues of climate justice. The framing for legal empowerment, at least as how we put it as Namati, is if you know the law, you can use the law and you can shape the law. So I'll break it down. If I think somebody was it Dora, talking about the lack of knowledge of the law or lack of awareness of what is happening, lack of the environmental laws. This is it's a major problem when it comes to legal empowerment. However, if you do know the law, the environmental law in your area or the local law in your area, and there's an injustice going on, what you do as an activist, you sit with the community and figure out what the law says, figure out what those rules say. It can be a small hook, it can be big, vast opportunity for you to engage with the law. Once you figure out what the law says, then you're in a position to use the law to claim the rights and shape the system. When we talk about use the law, different strategies. You can write a letter. You can now have a protest that is anchored on law. You can engage in several sittings that we've seen anchored in law. And when we talk about shape the law, it's a question about repealing a law, having a new law, or as we witnessed in a village in the southern part of Senegal, a village called Niafrang, they sat and they knew the law, and then they used the law to stop a mining company from continuing the activities in that local area. They wrote a letter to the local minister, and the minister stopped it. And what they did with the knowledge of the law is that they were able to invoke the law with confidence, invoke it with evidence, and the activism actually shaped the law because the mining activity stopped. And that's what you talk about no use and shape law. I apologize, I'm presenting this in a very simplistic manner. And I know in context it's very different and it has to be adapted, but just sharing with you the overall framework and thinking and the ideology behind using law as an organizing tool. Very tied to this is the question of building community power to fight institutions and systems. As activists, we can't do it by ourselves. As my colleague had said, we need a network of community support to bolster the work that we're doing as youth activists. So what I also noticed was a gap in how the youth activism was linked to how they build community power to support them when they're doing this kind of national advocacy. And when we talk about building community power, for us and from the years of work, years that we've done this work, there are 4 pillars that we look at when building community power. There's casework, obviously going to case and, invoking the laws, use and shape the law. And then there's collective action, where we all go and do a sit-in because this law says you're not allowed to do so, or we're going to sit in until we have a proper law that respects us as indigenous people. The other one is developing grassroots leadership, which is so important, and community education. When we talk about developing grassroots leadership, activists need to know at the back of their head that they can't do it alone. There's obviously the burnout that we've noticed, and there's strength in numbers in terms of offering that kind of protection. So it's a gap that I noticed, and also we had the opportunity to discuss it with them. Yes, yes. Just one more thing to add on the question of building community power. What I noticed just from the course that we just did, and also speaking with youth activists as they do this work, is kind of a failure to recognize that power lies at the heart of every injustice that they've been fighting. So when they realize that, they're able to have a whole 360 holistic picture of the system that they're fighting, and it better informs their strategies. So as we say, legal empowerment is a sustainable approach. You don't need to be an advocate. With legal empowerment, we're democratizing the law and putting the power of the law in people's hands, in children's hands, in youth's hands, in everybody's hands. As long as you know the law, you can try and do something. And then youth organizations need access to this specific strategy so that they're deliberate, focused, and strengthened. And that is what we offered. So I thank you so much. It was in a rush, but we also welcome more questions. Thank you.
We've got 5 minutes for maybe a couple of questions.
Hi everyone. Great job, Lovaya. My question is actually to you. I mean, I feel like we've listened to a lot of children, and like they've told us what they want us to do. But I want you to just repeat it to us. You're an African child living in Madagascar, which is actually a community in itself, yeah. And it's a very sensitive space, especially when you're talking about climate change and climate action. What would you want us as well, we're young people, but you're younger than us, yeah? We are the generation just before you. What would you want us to do?
I will speak Malagasy. Ny zavatra tokony ataon'ny tanora mba azahoanan'le ho avy tsara de m- m- miaro ny tontolo iainana sy mianatra tsara de miteny ny lehibe raha ohatra hoe misy zavatra tsy mety ataon'ny lehibe de miresaka aminjare.
I hope that young people will more engage on climate actions and collaborate with the grown-ups to have more impact on the environment and on climate.
My question is also for Lova, and it's good to see you there. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was wonderful and very helpful. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you connect with, how do you find the movements in other countries? Do you connect with movements in other countries for global? Is that hard, or do you work locally? How do you connect?
Ya, manana amin'ny ankiziny miaraka amin'ny UNICEF, ohatra hoe Francisco zao le jeune défenseur ny climat, de ny zavatra nataony miaraka de le nandray anjara tamin'ny COP de niresaka tamin'ireo olon-dehibe ny zavatra ilain'ny ankizy amin'izao fotoana sy any aoriana.
Actually, I am connected with other young youth, other young people, youth advocates at UNICEF, like Francisco, who is a youth advocate for UNICEF too. Their common action is, for instance, at COP28 last year, where they advocated together for the rights of children to be protected.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name's Don Cipriani. I'm the director of Ignite Philanthropy, inspiring the end of violence against girls and boys. I just wanted to thank you for this session. I think it's absolutely essential that we be talking about these issues. That you've brought youth voice into the session has been critical, and the work that our colleagues have presented is fascinating. Just as a related perspective on that, I wanted to share some of our own learning and perspectives on these questions that I think you might find interesting or useful. Ignite Philanthropy just launched a new strategy at the beginning of this year, which is actually a very different model for how we do what we do. To get there, we went through a deep learning process, and a couple of the things we did took us unexpectedly to questions around climate crisis. By that, I'll describe it in two phases. First, we sought to speak with leading youth participation practitioners, youth leaders, and former youth leaders from around the world. And we spoke with about a dozen or so such leaders. And basically the question was, where's the youth energy today? What are youth organizing around? Where's the greatest activism? Where are the greatest results? And I conducted most of those interviews myself. We didn't outsource this because we thought it was so important. All but one of the respondents said, climate crisis. And that really, really stood out to us. So as a next step to unpack that, we commissioned a scanning of youth organizing and activism around the world, excluding North America, because that's already quite well researched, trying to observe and listen and understand what that activism and energy looked like anywhere around the continuum of violence-related issues. So not trying to apply our parameters for what's important, but to observe and listen and watch through networks, through wise consultants, basically, and understand what that looked like for groups on the ground. And so, for example, the finding that was shown before about intersectionality came out incredibly, incredibly strongly. Groups were almost never working around any one issue. They were almost always working around a multiplicity of issues. So if it was climate crisis, it was climate plus gender plus violence, violence plus disabilities plus climate, this sort of thing, again and again and again in almost every region of the world, which was quite stunning for us. I'll just add as a side note as well, really interestingly, almost no groups were framing their work as children's rights, and almost no groups were framing their work as violence against children, which meant a lot for us, and I can talk more about that some other time. But climate crisis continued to surface as one of the real driving issues. The other last reflection, I'll keep this very brief. I'm really excited for this session because what I think we've struggled to do as a broad-based community is to embrace youth activism around climate and to help build alliances with those doing the climate work on the ground. So this is particularly important. I've even witnessed the same thing in similar funder spaces around human rights or social justice. It's almost as if climate crisis action is a separate space somehow. And I don't understand what we're missing, because as today's presentation and the youth leader has shown us, climate crisis is a rights issue. Climate crisis is a violence issue. It's a gender issue. They're completely intertwined. And that's what the work looks like on the ground. That's the way youth are organizing. So somehow we're going to have to catch up to them and support them where they're at those intersections doing this incredible work. So really hats off to you. I think this is absolutely essential. Really glad to see it. Thank you.
Question is, obviously jargon is such an issue at COP to make it more children friendly, but at the same time, to be able to become a delegate or participate in such spaces, you must understand jargon and be trained in that, UN language to be able to communicate to different communities there. I wonder how you would suggest me or other youth delegates to approach jargon and make it more accessible to different communities when we come back to our country and share our insights from what we've learned at COP. Thank you so much.
Let me see if I got it right. You want to understand, like, when you go back, how you can democratize your, I think, communication. I think it's something that it's really important, just to have, for example, I'm sure when Luva went back, just to have contact with media, this is one way of doing things. I think media has a very powerful impact on that. And also to just like talk to different, like in the school or different nonprofit organization. One way that we also like to work a lot is to work like collaboratively with other organizations that also have the opportunity to go, for example, to the COP and maybe like write a message or something and ask them to also share. So just to have this joint effort to share the same message. So I think so being more objective, I think media would help a lot, and also to have like other partners also sharing the same message with you to reach out like a wider audience.
On your particular question, there's a group in Dakar. They have youth cafes. They're called FGHR Senegal. So not everybody can make it to COP because you know how it's just difficult to leave the continent sometimes. So what they do is they have local level COPs. And so whatever is happening at COP, like in the last COP, they would have a local level version and they take the highlights of what's important for them and really break it down into Wolof so that people can understand and follow along. There's a bit of collaboration with people who are already at the COP. So they'll be able to do like small voice notes on WhatsApp. This is what we discuss, is, very practical, and then send it to them and then discuss that in Wolof, break it down, and then try and keep up. It's a bit of logistical issues, but that's how the youth, at least in that area in Dakar, are trying to keep up with what is happening.
Yeah, I think I'm so sorry. I saw many hands, but we've got to wrap this up. I want to say a big thank you to our speakers. You've been incredible. Say thanks to everyone, to the audience. This is just the beginning of this conversation at Elevate. I'm sure there'll be many more opportunities. Like Dan said, we need to engage with this team more, so today will be like an invitation, and later on in our action spaces, I hope to see more conversation around this. Thank you very much.